Good afternoon. This is Ron Keel on the Streets of Rock and Roll. Is this my anonymous rock star guest?
Yes, it is.
Fantastic. Thanks for calling. How are you?
I'm good. You? How you been, bud?
I am great, man. And I really appreciate this opportunity. I know you just got out of the dentist appointment, and thanks for making time for me. Oh.
I'm on my way there, right? So.
Wow, we can get a live report from the chair? Really?
Yeah, all that winding and drilling and screaming and...
Fantastic, man. Well, I do appreciate the call. You don't need my help selling out this tour, but I do appreciate the opportunity to get you on the show and to talk to you. Thanks for calling.
I appreciate it, bud.
And not sure if you got the liners from Mike Brandvold or not, but I would love to get a couple of those before we kick it off.
Sure, I didn't. He sent me some stuff, but I haven't gotten it yet. Now, I'm living out in the sticks, and we're about a half a step away from using tin can and a string, to communicate. So I'm sorry I haven't gotten them yet.
Well, if
you want to wait, until at the end, hopefully they will come in by then.
Well, that'll be fine as well, and you can pre-record those on your phone or from home if you like. Just one for the show and one for the station. But we can go ahead and kick off the interview. Your audio sounds good, and man, it's just great to talk to you. I appreciate this.
Well, how's life been treating you?
Life has been good, man. I mean, we'll talk about that during the interview, about which of us thought we'd still be doing this 40 years later, but... Man, I am blessed. I've never had a broken bone. I've never had any surgery. I've just been singing and playing, and I'm still 17 in my head.
Then you haven't lived, buddy. If no broken bones, no surgeries, you got to be kidding. I have broken, I don't know how much stuff in my life. My foot, my leg, my back, umpteen rib, fingers, wrist, nose, I mean, you name it. I've gotten my money's worth.
I guess so.
I mean, it's like, and a lot of it was stupid stuff. Some of it was playing sports. But all of it was literally my own hand. So I got nobody to blame but me.
Exactly, and I want to let you know that we'll be cutting the interview down to about 13 minutes for radio broadcast, but we'll do the whole conversation for the podcast version, which goes out to Spotify and iTunes and all those other platforms. So we'll edit this down, and you let me know when we're running out of time, but I'd like to get to it.
Go ahead. Let's go.
One of many all-time classics from W.A.S.P, I Want to Be Somebody, and my special guest this week is somebody who sold over 12 million albums and literally set fire to the bridge between shock and rock for 4 decades now. Blackie Lawless, welcome to the Streets of Rock and Roll. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you, sir.
Congratulations on the 40th anniversary of W.A.S.P. As you get set to embark on an extensive 8-month world tour, did we ever think we'd still be doing this 40 years later?
That's an interesting question, because I remember when we went on our first world tour, and we had not done a lot of interviews at that point. And the one question that I was hearing more than anything was, do you think the band will be around in 5 years? And I told them, hey, I don't know if we'll be around in 5 months. It's like we just got started. And I thought they were, pointing that question at us. And I realized later that that's something all new bands get, But, I mean, you have to have a crystal ball to look into the future. And you've heard the expression, it's harder to stay there than it is to get there. Well, that's true, because, you have to keep reinventing yourself and your music from time to time when you do this. So knowing those things is impossible to begin with. You have to take it a step at a time. You literally put one foot in front of the other, and in that sense it becomes linear, as to how you piece your life and your career together. So to say that, all of us would love to sit and say, we had this grand scheme or whatever, but that's hogwash. There's really no way you can do that. And on top of that, it's impossible to gauge how an audience is going to interpret what you do, because if you take a given song and you put 10 people in a room, you're going to have 10 different opinions on it. So to try to get 1 million people to agree on any one thing is almost impossible. So if you look at the likelihood of any artist having a long career, the odds are so stacked against you, it's pretty crazy.
We don't have time in one short interview to recap all those accomplishments and experiences, so I encourage everyone to visit the website, waspnation.com, and read your personal blog. I found it fascinating, interesting, and entertaining. That personal touch that you put on that blog. You just stepped back on stage July 23rd in Sweden for your first show in 2.5 years. You recap that perfectly in the blog, but please share some of those thoughts and feelings with us on the air right now, if you would.
Well, it's bizarre when you haven't done that for a while, because, we were literally making plans to go to start a world tour after that. That would have been in 2020, and then, life is what happens when you're making other plans.
Yeah.
So, the pandemic hit, and, everybody was sidelined. So, the longest layoff we had ever had before that was 3 years. And it was strange, because the first time that happened in the mid-'90s, I went away to make another record, and I came back. The first day in rehearsal, one of the guys handed me a guitar. I put it on, and I stood there, and I felt like a fish out of water. I didn't know what to do. And that whole day in rehearsal, I was like bumbling around, not sure how to do it again. But this time was different. We went into rehearsal, and it was like we just hadn't been there in a couple of weeks. And there was a joy. And, and I don't think it was just me either, because I noticed when we did 2 shows in Sweden. We got out on that first show, and the looks on people's faces, I could see joy in it. It was probably because, there had been this gap that everybody learned to develop a new appreciation for what they hadn't had for the last few years. So again, I don't think it was just me. I think it was just, a collective experience of what was going on there. But I was feeling it, and I was seeing it. And, after all the years of doing this, sometimes one show blurs into the next, but this was not the case with this, because, like I said, I could clearly see it on people's faces. So that was a really, really cool experience. That's something I've, after all these years, I'd never experienced that before.
Wow. There seems to be a serious contrast between the real Blackie Lawless, a man who's serious about his religious beliefs, you come across online as the down-to-earth guy next door, and then there's the shock rock monster everyone sees on stage. How do you juggle that dichotomy in those two personalities?
I think everybody has, probably different personalities within them. I heard somebody say a while back, and I thought it was the best way I've ever heard anybody describe it, that doing what we do is a bit like having a ventriloquist dummy in your lap. That personality comes out and starts being Don Rickles and insulting people when it needs to. In our particular case, you don't insult people, but the whole idea of the ventriloquist dummy, that extrovert that comes out and says and does the things that maybe we wouldn't normally do. Well, I think all entertainers have that to some degree. So I just, I don't see what I do as that extreme. It's just, I'm passionate about whatever I do. But I have general taste, believe it or not, like most people do. I like the same music and the same food and the same movies that most people like. I really don't have extremes of taste or personality. So if I like it, there's a pretty good chance that some other people are going to like it too. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to examine, from point A to point B to point C within those personality traits that that probably everybody has. I mean, everybody gets happy, everybody gets sad, everybody gets angry, and what we're doing is just maybe pushing the boundaries of those feelings, but I don't really think it's that extreme. And certainly, somebody says, well, can you shock an audience anymore? I don't know if it's possible to do that. I mean, you certainly can't go beyond the headlines that you see on the news, certainly. So yeah. I don't know.
I'm speaking with Blackie Lawless, the W.A.S.P. Back to the Beginning. 40th Anniversary World Tour hits the States October 28th in Las Vegas. The next big festival date just a couple of weeks away at the Mexico Metal Fest in Monterey. Blackie, and as a singer, man, I got to ask, the 2.5-year break is like an eternity for guys like us whose trademark is that loud, powerful, aggressive, growling tone. What did you do during that long hiatus to keep the pipes active?
Well, it was a blessing in disguise. When we first started in early '83, I ruptured the left side of my voice, and I was told I was probably never going to sing again. And I had contracted a viral laryngitis that was going around. Everybody had it, and everybody had it, sounded like they had laryngitis when they spoke. But because of singing and building that muscle up, I didn't have it when I spoke. It was only when I went to sing, and so I went into rehearsal, and I was cracking when I was singing, but I just kept pushing through it because I thought it wasn't loose. And I destroyed the whole left side of my larynx. So I had to go through a whole thing where I didn't speak for 9 weeks, and I had to write everything down. I mean, it was an eternity. I'm giving you, the Reader's Digest version of what happened, but it was pretty traumatic. So what that taught me, and the doctor taught me after that, he says, when you watch the Olympics and the guys are getting ready to do the 100-meter dash, what are they doing on the side before the race starts? And I said, stretching. He goes, why don't you try doing that? So that's something that I've done ever since. I stretch the muscle. I get blood into it to warm it up before I start singing. But with what we do, I cannot just continue to keep that thing loose. Again, it's a muscle like anything else, so I have to strengthen that thing before I do a show. I just cannot go out and do a show. So I have to start a few weeks ahead of time getting it into shape. I'll start out, I'll do a half a song the first day, I'll do a whole song the next day, 2 songs, 3 songs, and so forth. And, that's the only way to do it, and to keep it safe. Because if you want to keep this thing, you have to maintenance it. And people say, well, you sound as good, as you did, 4 decades ago. Well, it's like, again, it's a muscle like anything else. You take care of it, it'll take care of you.
A great insight, and I love talking the voice with other singers like that, man. Thank you for that commentary. W.A.S.P, the band, has a very strong presence on social media, well over 300,000 Facebook followers, but you personally have maintained your mystique, and I love that. But by not having any personal social media pages, is that by design, or why isn't the blog is great on your website, but there's no Blackie Lawless Facebook or Twitter?
Well, a couple of reasons. With what we do, and I'm sure you can relate to this, we have a full life. And people ask me, how's it going? I go, you ever seen that dog in the middle of the floor chasing his butt? Well, that's me. That's me, and it's like, so if the one word that we probably use more than anything is balance. How do you have balance in your life? It's difficult. And I learned a while back that balance is not something that just comes over and sits down in your lap. You have to reach out with both hands and take it and demand it. So to do that, where you have a personal life, it's people. And I'm going to get off this subject for just a second. When people say,
Please,
well, what kind of music do you listen to when you're making a record? And I say, I don't. And they look at you strange. And I say, well, if you were a mechanic and you worked on brakes all day long, would you want to go home and work on your own brakes? Maybe not. Depending how bad the brakes were. But, going back to what we were saying before, you try to create balance in what you're doing. So another thing that happened was when we went through all that stuff in the 80s and the PMRC and all of that, it made me a bit of a recluse. So I try to distance myself as best I can from my professional life. I mean, where I live now, I live about an hour north of L.A., and I'm out in the sticks. And there's more cows and horses than there are people, and I prefer it like that. So, I go, when it's time for me to work, I go into the cities and I do what I need to do. But when I'm not doing that, I try to distance myself as best I can, and also find that helps maintain the mystique. So it's kind of a win-win.
Absolutely, I get that, and I love those. Back when we were coming up, the bands that we admired and followed had that mystique, whether it was Zeppelin or whatever. They weren't so accessible as people are now, and obviously you don't need that to sell out your tour. You're going to do just fine on this long tour you're about to embark on. I didn't see that first show at the Woodstock Concert Theater in Anaheim, but I was there. I was there for that spectacular debut at the Troubadour in Hollywood shortly afterward, man. And
wow.
I can comment as both that night an audience member and the lead singer from another band, Steeler. And that night, we all knew that Hollywood had been hit by a wrecking ball, man, and you were dead serious about getting everybody's attention.
You got great insight, because I think there were 63 people there that night. So then we count you as one of them. But
absolutely,
it was funny because I've said many times we never had any intention of playing live. I mean, you having been there, you knew that, making a demo tape was the best thing that you could do, and make the best demo that you could, because bands weren't getting signed off a live performance. They were getting signed off of demos. And so we'd been there long enough, we knew that. So that was the whole idea, but, we sent the tapes out, and a couple of months went by, and we weren't getting any response. And so we said, these songs are actually okay. Why don't we try them, in a live situation and see what happens? And we did, and one thing led to another, and here we are now. But it's like out of default. That's how it happened.
I remember that night, man, like it was yesterday. I felt the heat of the flames. You're tossing meat in the audience. We were starving, and you're tossing meat in the audience, and we're taking it home and cooking it up, man. It was amazing.
We were taking the concessions away from Doug at that point. Doug was the owner of the Troubadour.
And you say the upcoming tour will look, sound, and feel different than anything you've ever done before. Without giving away any surprises, can you tease the production aspect of this show just a little bit?
Well, in '86, we did a record called Inside the Electric Circus. And I had, as a kid, I was born in Tampa. Before I moved to New York when we were like 7, or when I was 7, in Tampa, there's an area there that's just south of Tampa called Gibsonton. And Gibsonton is an area where a lot of people from the circus go in the off seasons and winter there, And so I grew up literally around seeing circus people. And as a matter of fact, where we lived, there was a family that were trapeze artists. And when I was a little kid, like when I was 5, I'd walk over there and I'd watch them rehearse. And I was fascinated by it. So the whole idea of the circus has been something that's really been part of my makeup. And so we visited this in '86. But what happened is when we were moving into playing arenas, what I originally wanted to do was more like an old-fashioned 1930s carnival. But because we were moving into bigger venues, everyone said, well, it's not big enough, it's not flashy enough, it's got to be bigger, it's got to fill up those rooms. So what we ended up doing was a much more flashy production, and it was good, but it was not my original idea. So I'm getting an opportunity now to go back and do this thing that looks like a 1930s carnival, but this is a dark carnival. And dark in the sense that when we first started, and I was talking about making the demos, one day we were in the studio, and something happened and a piece of gear broke down, and we had to, take a few hours off. And so there was a movie theater across the street, and Road Warrior was playing there. And so we said, okay, we wanted to see the movie, so we went over and watched it, and I was absolutely riveted to it. And I remember thinking, all right, if we go out and we do this stuff live, this is what we're going to look like, this is what we're going to feel like. And the whole idea, when we were wearing the pants that had no backs in them and all that stuff, all that came from the Road Warrior. We thought for sure we would get busted on this. And we were waiting for those questions, and we never once got busted on it. And we couldn't believe it, because we stole our whole act from that movie. The girl on the rack, all that stuff came from that movie. So if you could imagine today an old 1930s kind of sideshow, dark carnival / road warrior, that's what this is going to look like.
Fantastic. Thank you for that insight on what the upcoming tour will look, feel, and sound like. If you don't know it by now, I'm talking to Blackie Lawless from W.A.S.P. on the streets of rock and roll. Now, Blackie, you and I have a couple of times swapped bandmates. And if I could go there, if you don't mind, Stephen Riley was the drummer in Keel, and we were in the studio recording The Right to Rock. And as soon as he hit that last drum fill, the last drum track, he pulls me aside and says, I quit. Blackie's made me an offer I can't refuse. I'm joining W.A.S.P. And that was it. How did that go down from your perspective?
I did not know that. I did not know that. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's cool, man. It's cool. Yeah.
None of us knew that. Chris didn't know it. I didn't know it. Wow.
Literally.
Because we had heard that he had been in a band called, I think it was the Bees.
That's right. Yeah.
And the joke with us is, well, okay, he goes from the Bees to W.A.S.P., and that was kind of funny, so, but that's all we knew of it. Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, it was the last day of the session, man. He literally hit the last drum fill, put the sticks down, and walked up to me and said, I quit. Blackie's made me an offer I can't refuse. I'm joining W.A.S.P. And that was all she wrote. But I didn't know how that unfolded from your perspective. But a great guy and a great part of our mutual history. And if you don't mind me going here, Steeler bassist Rick Fox spent some time with you as well. Rick was in my band Steeler and cut the Steeler record with Yngwie Malmsteen and I. And any comment on his tenure in W.A.S.P. and his claim that he suggested the name of the band?
Well, the first show, he was brought in from the East Coast, and he did some rehearsals with us, and it didn't work out. So, to say that, I would have thought to be in a band, you would have had to have played live with that band. I guess if you were just a studio band, which we didn't do that either. Let's put it this way. I wouldn't say that someone trying out for a band would necessarily make them a member of a band. So,
all right. Well, there are photos. There are photos of him with you.
We did some photo tests. Correct, and we did some test sessions to see how it would look, but that's stuff that we had done, with other people anyway, so, and I'm not trying to downplay it. I'm just, I want to be historically accurate.
Absolutely.
When it comes to that, so, that first show that we did that would have been 40 years ago this past week, that was, the guy that was playing bass there was Don Costa. So that was really, for us, once we started doing the demos, I can tell you specifically, it was June 6th of 82 that I met with Chris Holmes. And Chris and I had been in a band before. And Chris and I sat, and, we had a meeting that day, and we said, let's go in the studio and try this. So Tony had been working with us already, and Tony had been in the band Dante Fox.
Yeah.
Which would eventually become Great White. And Don was also the bass player for Dante Fox at that time, so they both came and worked with us, and, we did the demos, and then, the concept of playing live came after that. So that's really how it unfolded.
Well, I appreciate you going there and addressing that. Rick is still my bandmate in Steeler and a part of our family, and I would be remiss in my media duties if I didn't at least ask you that question. But now it's all about 2022 and beyond. And for the next 8 months or more, catch W.A.S.P. on tour with special guest Armored Saint. These shows will sell out, so get your tickets now while you can and enjoy Blackie's written reports. These are fantastic. These updates, these blog posts at waspnation.com. Blackie, congratulations once again on 4 decades of success. Best of luck on tour, and thanks for joining us on the streets of rock and roll.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you having me.
Great job, man. That was a great discussion. I hope you don't mind me going there, but I think I had to, if that's all right with you.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
You want to catch those liners real quick while we're on the line?
I still don't have Michael's email, but if you want to just, give me a quick,
Sure.
What it's supposed to say.
Blackie Lawless on the streets of rock and roll with Ron Keel.
Hi there, this is Blackie Lawless from W.A.S.P, and you're listening to The Streets of Rock and Roll with Ron Keel.
Excellent. And one for the station, KRFK Radio. KRFK Radio, Live the Rock. Blackie Lawless, you're listening to KRFK Radio, Live the Rock.
Just 1 second.
Ron fucking Keel, KRFK. That's how I compartmentalize it.
Okay, yeah, that would work. Hi there, this is Blackie Lawless from W.A.S.P, and you're listening to KRFK Radio, Live the Rock.
You are the best, my friend. Thank you so much for doing this. What a great discussion, great insight, great sound bites, and just a huge victory for us, for the show and the station. I appreciate you. I applaud your success and wish you all the best in the months and years to come.
All right, bud. You look after yourself.
Absolutely.
Good talking to you.
You too, man.
All right,
Thank you.
Take care now.
All right.